Behind the glitz and glamour of the music industry lies a darker reality that few artists dare to speak about. When young talent sign those first contracts, they often have no idea what they're getting themselves into. The promise of fame and fortune can quickly turn into something far more complicated. Today, we're diving into the untold stories of celebrity mentorships and what really happens when the cameras stop rolling. The concept of mentorship in the music industry has been around for decades. Established artists taking younger talents under their wing seems noble on the surface, but insiders have revealed that some of these arrangements have a different name behind closed doors: flavor camps. These aren't about nurturing talent or teaching craft. They're about indoctrination into a lifestyle that few parents would knowingly allow their children to witness. These setups involve young artists, sometimes as young as 14 or 15, being placed in environments completely unsuitable for their age. Instead of learning about music production or performance techniques, these teens are exposed to adult environments filled with excess, alcohol, drugs, and situations no minor should witness. One former child star described his experience. "I thought I was going to learn how to be a star. What I saw instead were things no teenager should be around. From the moment he entered the mansion, the environment was saturated in excess. Champagne on breakfast trays, strangers waking up in rooms he didn't know existed, people he later recognized from TV and magazines lounging half-dressed or passed out." Another rising star recalled being told explicitly, "This is how we do it. You don't ask, you just watch. Learn by watching. That's how grown men roll." These young artists weren't being taught about vocals or performance. They were being encouraged to observe a lifestyle, to party with celebrities, and to stop asking questions. The message was clear: this is the price of admission to the exclusive club of fame. Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts of ritualistic parties that take place behind closed doors. One artist described waking up around 3:00 a.m. to find people in masks entering an apartment. Music was playing low and candles lit the hallway. What he witnessed in the living room could only be described as organized and structured, not just debauchery, but something with rules and observers. "I thought maybe I had walked into a movie set," he said. "I remember thinking I shouldn't be seeing this." He was told to go back to bed, but didn't sleep that night. That was the moment he said changed how he saw his mentor forever. But these experiences aren't isolated incidents. Multiple sources have confirmed similar stories spanning decades, suggesting a pattern that continues to this day. What's most shocking is how many people turn a blind eye. Industry executives, managers, even parents, all supposedly responsible for protecting these young talents, often look the other way, either out of ignorance or because they too are caught in the web of power and influence. Perhaps the most insidious part of these mentorship arrangements are the contracts that accompany them. Young artists, eager to pursue their dreams, often sign paperwork they don't fully understand, documents that can haunt them for decades. Industry insiders have revealed these contracts frequently contain clauses that go far beyond standard NDAs. Some include language about audio-visual documentation and unauthorized reproduction, terms that take on a sinister meaning when considered alongside allegations of recorded compromising situations. "At the time, I didn't even know what half the words meant. My mother had to co-sign and the label's lawyers said it was standard, but now looking back, I know what it was. A contract to keep me quiet," one artist admitted. These legal documents effectively buy silence. Young performers aren't allowed to speak about parties, guests, behaviors. They're told it would ruin the brand. But what about what it does to them? These contracts aren't just about protecting business interests. They're weapons of control that can be wielded years later. One artist described working on an interview with a major publication in 2009. The questions started getting personal, digging into his early experiences in the industry. Suddenly, he received a call from his former label's legal team. They reminded him of his NDA and said, "We hope you're not trying to jeopardize your reputation." The interview never happened, and it's not just lawyers. Artists report receiving veiled threats from people still tied to their former mentors' empires, people they hadn't spoken to in years. You think you're done with that world, but it's never done with you. And if you step out of line, there are consequences, not just to your career, but to your safety, one revealed. These aren't idle threats. Artists have described watching their careers suddenly stall, tours canceled, producers pulling out of projects, and doors that had always been open suddenly slamming shut. The pattern is clear. Those who don't play by the unwritten rules find themselves isolated and pushed out of the industry they once thrived in. The psychological impact of these experiences often remains hidden from the public eye. While fans see their favorite artists performing on stage or accepting awards, they have no idea about the battles being fought behind the scenes. Several major artists have quietly sought treatment for anxiety, PTSD, and panic attacks stemming from their early experiences in the industry. One artist described checking into a mental health facility under a false name after having a breakdown triggered by familiar smells and environments. "I walked into the hallway and smelled the same brand of candles he used to burn," the artist recalled. "My whole body froze. I started shaking. I couldn't breathe." That night, his team rushed him to a clinic where he stayed under observation for 5 days. What he shared with the in-house psychiatrist is something he had never revealed publicly before. "I told him I saw things no kid should see. I lived in a world where power meant silence and survival meant smiling through it." The psychiatrist diagnosed him with PTSD, a revelation that stunned both the industry and his fans. It took nearly 2 years of therapy before he could sleep through the night without recurring nightmares. Though he never named others who may have gone through the same thing, he hinted that several other young artists who had similar relationships with powerful mentors had also disappeared or suffered emotional breakdowns but were too afraid to speak. "I was lucky. I had the money to get help, but some of the others didn't. One of them overdosed, another tried to take his life, and a third, he just vanished." When asked why he kept this a secret for over 2 decades, his answer was simple, but devastating. "Because nobody would have believed me. He was untouchable, and I was just the kid with the voice." These stories point to a deeply troubling aspect of the music industry, the existence of private trips and exclusive gatherings designed to test young artists' loyalty and willingness to participate in the culture. One artist described being taken to the Caribbean at age 15 by his mentor. "It was supposed to be a retreat, just me, him, and a couple others. The place was isolated, no press, no cameras, and that's where I realized I wasn't there to learn anything about music." He paused before adding, "I won't go into everything, but what I will say is that I wasn't given a choice about the environment I was placed in, and it took me years to understand the manipulation." Another disturbing pattern involves introducing young artists to so-called investors who can supposedly fast-track their careers. One performer described being invited to meet a powerful music investor who could fund his first world tour. "I thought it was about business," he explained. "He hyped it up like it was the biggest break of my life. He told me to dress up, look sharp, and be polite." When the artist arrived at the penthouse suite, he found 3 men lounging in robes, with high-end champagne and several young women sitting quietly in the background. One of the men, who was from overseas, asked him if he wanted to be remembered forever, and he wasn't talking about music. The artist was left alone with the men. "I felt trapped," he testified. "They didn't touch me. But one of them put his hand on my shoulder and said, 'You can stay or you can leave, but you'll never get another invitation like this again.' He left, and that's when things started to change. He was removed from one tour opportunity, and a prominent producer suddenly pulled out of working with him. 'No one ever said it was because I left that suite,' he explained. But after that night, doors that had always been open suddenly shut. Perhaps most disturbing is how this cycle perpetuates itself. Those who were once victims sometimes become perpetrators themselves, creating a toxic lineage in the industry. When one established artist was confronted about his treatment of young talents, his response was chilling. "Same thing they did to me. It's how the game works." This mentality explains why the system has been allowed to continue for so long. It's viewed as a twisted rite of passage rather than what it truly is: exploitation. The influence of these powerful mentors extends beyond just the artists under their direct control. They create entire ecosystems of enablers and facilitators who benefit from maintaining the status quo. Security guards who confiscate phones at private parties. Drivers who transport young artists to and from questionable locations without asking questions. Assistants who book hotel rooms and make arrangements while turning a blind eye to what's happening. These individuals form a protective barrier around the mentor, ensuring that what happens behind closed doors stays there. Even more concerning are the connections between these mentorship arrangements and other aspects of the entertainment industry. Some artists have described being introduced to film producers, fashion designers, and even politicians through their music industry mentors, creating a web of influence that extends far beyond music. These connections often come with strings attached and the expectation that the young artist will play nice with whoever they're introduced to, regardless of how uncomfortable the situation might be. The physical locations where these mentorships play out deserve scrutiny as well. Multiple sources have described private mansions with secret rooms, penthouses with restricted access, and even isolated international properties where normal rules and oversight don't apply. These aren't just luxury accommodations, they're carefully designed environments where power dynamics can be fully exploited away from prying eyes. One artist described being brought to a lavish mansion with marble floors, security at every door, a DJ spinning until sunrise. But what stood out wasn't the luxury, it was the secret room at the back of the mansion. When he peeked in, he saw people in masks engaged in activities he still struggles to describe. "I think that night changed me," he confessed. "I saw things I still can't explain. I don't know if it was legal, but I know it wasn't right." The business practices surrounding these mentorships also reveal troubling patterns. One artist submitted internal emails and contract drafts showing he had signed a development deal as a teen that locked him into 5 albums and gave away the rights to his masters until the age of 35. "I didn't know what I was signing," he admitted. "I just wanted to sing." He then exposed how other artists were tied into similar contracts, creating a pattern of exploitation that disproportionately affected young performers eager to break into the industry. He alleged that certain powerful figures had a pattern of pulling artists close with promises of mentorship and exposure, only to discard them once they were no longer useful or obedient. He even revealed that a private accountant once sent him a spreadsheet with the royalties he had missed over the years, totaling more than $4.3 million. When he brought this to his mentor's attention, the response was telling. "If you knew what was really owed to you, you wouldn't sleep at night." Court documents have revealed that several artists have taken settlements in silence, some accepting small payments just to regain the right to use their names or perform their songs. One of the biggest revelations was that artists had tried to organize a secret meeting in 2011 to address their collective grievances, but said the meeting never happened because someone tipped off the powers that be. Even more damning was a claim that one artist once saw a mentor order the destruction of demo tapes and footage belonging to an artist who had threatened to speak out. That artist has since vanished from public life. I don't know where he is. Nobody does. But I remember his voice, and I remember that he was scared. In recent years, the walls of silence have begun to crack. More artists are finding the courage to speak out, despite the potential consequences to their careers. "I survived, but did the kid in me survive? I still don't know," one artist wrote in a private journal entry that has since become public. Others are taking more direct action, organizing support groups for industry survivors, and creating alternative pathways for young talents to enter the business without being subjected to the same traumatic experiences. The role of social media in exposing these dynamics cannot be overlooked. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok have given artists direct lines of communication to their fans, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers who once controlled their narratives. This has allowed for more authentic storytelling, with some artists using coded language and symbolic imagery to hint at experiences they're still not free to discuss directly. As investigations into these industry practices continue, many wonder what it will take for real change to occur. Some point to the need for stronger legal protections for minors in entertainment. Others advocate for industry-wide codes of conduct with real accountability mechanisms. Still others believe that the change must come from consumers themselves, that fans need to become more discerning about which artists and labels they support with their dollars and streams. What remains clear is that the fairy tale version of celebrity mentorships, the idea that established stars take younger artists under their wing purely out of generosity and a desire to nurture talent, often bears little resemblance to reality. The truth is far more complex and, in many cases, far darker than most fans would ever imagine. For many artists who have lived through these experiences, the path to healing is long and difficult. Some have found solace in creating their own labels and production companies, determined to create the safe, nurturing environments they never had as young performers. Others have left the industry entirely, deciding that no amount of fame or fortune is worth the personal cost. And some remain trapped in cycles of silence and fear, unable to speak their truth even decades later. This isn't just about one man or one label, one artist testified during a recent court case. It's about an entire system that told kids like me to be quiet, to stay in line, and to never question the hands that fed us. But I'm here now, and I'm not afraid anymore. Not for me, because I've already lived through it. I'm doing this for the ones who didn't make it. As the veil continues to lift on these industry practices, some surprising allies have emerged from unexpected places. Veteran producers who once sat silently in studios while young artists were manipulated are now coming forward with their own accounts. I watched it happen for 20 years. One Grammy-winning producer admitted in a recent anonymous interview, "I told myself it wasn't my business, that the kids were getting what they wanted, fame, money, opportunity. But when you see the same pattern play out over and over, you start to realize it's not coincidence, it's calculated." Even more revealing are the accounts from former security personnel who worked at these exclusive events. One former bodyguard described his growing discomfort with what he was witnessing. "At first, I thought I was just doing my job, keeping people safe, checking IDs, confiscating phones. But then I started noticing the ages. Some of these kids looked barely old enough to drive, yet they were being brought into situations no teenager should be in. I couldn't sleep at night knowing I was part of that system." The financial arrangements behind these mentorships reveal another layer of exploitation. A former accountant for one major label described intricate systems designed to keep young artists dependent on their mentors. "The advances seemed generous, but the fine print was brutal," he explained. "High interest rates on recoupment, excessive consultation fees deducted from royalties, mandatory use of specific vendors that kicked back percentages to the mentor. It was all designed to keep the artist working while barely breaking even." This financial control often extended to housing arrangements. Many young artists were housed in properties owned by their mentors, creating both physical and financial dependency. Your mentor is your landlord. Your mentor controls your schedule. Your mentor approves who you can collaborate with. Your mentor has to sign off on your wardrobe choices. Before long, you don't make a single decision without thinking about how it will affect that relationship. One former teen star explained, "Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts of how these systems affect the music itself. Artists described being pushed to create content that doesn't align with their values or artistic vision. I wanted to make music about my real experiences, but that wasn't marketable enough," one performer revealed. "Instead, I was handed lyrics about partying and excess, exactly the lifestyle I was being pushed into behind the scenes. You become a caricature of yourself, selling an image that's slowly destroying you." The international dimension of these mentorship arrangements adds another layer of complexity. Young artists describe being taken on trips to countries where age restrictions and consent laws differ from those in the United States. "Once you cross certain borders, the rules change," a former child star explained. "Things that would be as scandalous or even illegal at home are suddenly just part of the culture, part of doing business. You're 16, jet-lagged in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, completely dependent on your team. How are you supposed to say no to anything?" The technology used to maintain control has evolved over the years as well. While NDAs and legal threats were once the primary methods of ensuring silence, digital surveillance has created new forms of leverage. Multiple sources describe having their phones and computers monitored, their social media accounts managed by team members, and their private communications scrutinized for any hint of dissatisfaction or rebellion. "Even when you're alone, you're never really alone," one artist said. "There's always someone watching, listening, making sure you stay in line." For female artists, these dynamics often take on additional dimensions of sexualization and objectification. Women in the industry describe being pitted against each other, encouraged to view other women as competition rather than potential allies. "They isolate you from other women who might validate your experiences," one female artist explained. "Instead, you're surrounded by men who all reinforce the same message, that this is normal, this is how the industry works, this is what you signed up for." The racial dynamics at play cannot be ignored either. Artists of color describe being subjected to different standards and expectations than their white counterparts. "As a black artist, I was expected to be grateful for any opportunity," one performer revealed. "When I raised concerns about my treatment, I was immediately labeled difficult and ungrateful." White artists could push back on the same issues and be considered assertive or principled. What makes these stories all the more troubling is how they contrast with the public personas carefully crafted for these mentors. In interviews and public appearances, they present themselves as nurturing figures committed to developing young talent and giving back to the industry. This disconnect between public image and private behavior creates cognitive dissonance for both the victims and the public, making it even harder for people to believe allegations when they do emerge. The same person who was terrifying behind closed doors would be charming and fatherly in front of cameras. One artist recalled, "They'd tell stories about how they were guiding me, teaching me the ropes, looking out for my best interests." And part of me wanted to believe it too, that there was some greater purpose to what I was going through, that it really was about the music and not the power. For many artists, recognition of what they experience comes years or even decades later, often triggered by seeing the same patterns play out with a new generation of performers. "I was watching this kid couldn't have been more than 15 at an industry party," one established artist shared. "The way my former mentor had his arm around him, the way he was introducing him to the same people, using the same phrases. It was like watching my own past play out again. That's when I knew it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just about talent. It was a system. The language used to normalize these experiences deserves examination as well. Terms like paying dues, earning your stripes, and proving your loyalty create frameworks that justify exploitation under the guise of tradition and industry norms. Young artists are told that everyone who came before them went through the same experiences, creating the impression that suffering is not just normal, but necessary for success. Parents of young performers often find themselves in impossible positions, weighing their child's dreams against concerning behavior they witness or hear about. "I knew something wasn't right," one mother of a former child star admitted, "but every time I raised concerns, I was made to feel like I was being overprotective, that I didn't understand the industry, that I was standing in the way of my child's success." The isolation doesn't just happen to the artists, it happens to their families too. Some industry veterans have begun creating alternative paths for young talents. "I started my label specifically to counter what I experienced," said one artist turned executive. "We have strict age policies, guardian requirements, and transparent contracts that don't include those insidious clauses. Success shouldn't require sacrifice of your dignity or safety." These efforts, while still relatively small compared to the industry giants, represent growing cracks in a system that has operated unchecked for decades. The role of streaming platforms in potentially enabling these dynamics is also coming under scrutiny. With revenue models that favor quantity of content over quality, artists describe feeling pressured to constantly produce new material, tour relentlessly, and maintain omnipresence on social media. This creates burnout and dependency on teams that promise to handle everything, often the entry point for exploitative relationships. You're so exhausted just trying to stay relevant that you'll agree to anything that seems like it might lighten the load, one artist explained. That's when you're most vulnerable to manipulation. Educational institutions that train young performers have begun implementing awareness programs specifically addressing industry power dynamics. "We used to just teach performance skills and basic business literacy," said one conservatory director. "Now we explicitly discuss boundaries, warning signs, and what constitutes appropriate professional conduct. We tell our students that no opportunity, no matter how big, is worth their safety or well-being." Some former victims have taken their experiences into therapeutic settings, working with mental health professionals to create specialized treatment protocols for industry trauma. "The PTSD that comes from these situations is unique," explained one psychologist who works exclusively with entertainment industry clients. "It combines elements of workplace harassment, childhood trauma, and complex financial entanglement. Traditional therapy approaches often miss the nuances. The spiritual and ritualistic elements that some artists describe witnessing at exclusive industry gatherings have taken on new significance as more stories emerge. Multiple accounts mention similar imagery, practices, and even specific locations, suggesting organized activities rather than spontaneous excess. It wasn't just partying, one source revealed. There were patterns, symbols, specific dates when certain gatherings would happen. As a teenager, I didn't recognize the significance. But looking back now, it's clear there was meaning behind it all. Even more troubling are allegations that some young artists were deliberately exposed to substances without their knowledge, creating chemical dependencies that made them easier to control. It started with drinks that tasted a little off, a performer recalled. Then suggestions that a little something would help with performance anxiety. Before I knew it, I couldn't function without it. Couldn't say no to anything they wanted me to do. My chemical dependency made me compliant. The Geographic epicenters of these systems deserve attention as well. While Los Angeles and New York are often cited as the primary locations where exploitation occurs, secondary markets like Atlanta, Miami, and increasingly international cities like London and Tokyo have been identified as places where oversight is even more limited and behavior potentially more extreme. Different cities have different rules, different networks, explained one artist who experienced mentorship in multiple locations. But the playbook is basically the same everywhere. Isolation, indoctrination, intimidation. Digital evidence of these experiences occasionally surfaces despite extensive efforts to suppress it. Former assistants describe witnessing the creation of extensive archives, recordings, photographs, and documents explicitly designed to ensure compliance from artists who might otherwise speak out. It wasn't just about capturing party footage, one former employee revealed. It was leverage, insurance that people would stay in line. I was instructed to organize it all, catalog it. That's when I knew I had to get out. What happens to those who do manage to break free? The aftermath of these mentorship experiences often follows predictable patterns. Some artists describe periods of self-destructive behavior as they process what happened to them. Others become reclusive, disappearing from public view for years at a time. Those who continue in the industry often exhibit hyper-control over their careers, insisting on unprecedented levels of artistic and business autonomy. Behaviors often labeled as difficult by the same industry that traumatized them. I refused to let anyone make decisions for me after that, one artist explained of her post-mentorship career. Every contract, every collaboration, every tour schedule. I scrutinized everything personally. The industry called me a diva, but I was just protecting myself from ever being in that position again. The long-term impact on musical creativity itself may be incalculable. How many authentic voices have been silenced? How many artistic innovations never materialized because talented people fled the industry rather than subject themselves to these systems? I often wonder about the music we've lost, reflected one producer. The artists who walked away, who couldn't separate their gift from their trauma, the ones who chose safety over expression. You can't quantify that kind of loss. For those still trapped in exploitative mentorship situations, hope comes from seeing others break free and speak their truth. Watching someone I admired stand up and say, "This happened to me," gave me permission to admit it happened to me too, said one younger artist who recently separated from a controlling mentor. It's like dominoes. Once one person finds the courage, others follow. I hope someday to be that courage for someone else. Industry awards shows and public celebrations of music present particularly complicated experiences for survivors. Standing on stage accepting an award alongside people who knew what was happening to me and did nothing. It's surreal, one artist revealed. The public sees a moment of triumph, but I'm looking out at a sea of faces knowing exactly who was complicit. Legal experts point to statutes of limitations as a significant barrier to justice. Many victims don't process their experiences until years later, by which time the legal window for action has closed. The system protects perpetrators, explained one entertainment attorney. By the time many artists understand what happened to them and are emotionally ready to pursue justice, the law no longer allows them to do so. That's why public testimony becomes so important. It may be the only recourse available. Some artists have found unlikely allies in former security personnel, drivers, and household staff who witnessed troubling behavior but felt powerless to intervene at the time. "I was just the housekeeper," one former employee said, "but I saw those kids' faces in the morning. I heard things at night. I've carried that guilt for years, and now I'm ready to back up their stories. I should have done more then, but I can do something now." The religious and cultural backgrounds of many young artists created additional vulnerabilities that mentors reportedly exploited. Many of us came from religious households. One artist explained, "We were taught to respect authority, to trust our elders. When behaviors conflicted with our upbringing, we didn't have the framework to challenge it. Instead, we questioned our own values, our own perceptions." That's how deep the manipulation went. As technology evolves, new challenges and opportunities emerge in addressing these industry patterns. Blockchain verification of contract terms, greater transparency in royalty accounting, and decentralized distribution models all offer potential pathways to reduce the power imbalances that enable exploitation. The technology exists to create safer systems, one music tech entrepreneur argued. The question is whether there's the will to implement it. Meanwhile, the human cost of these systems continues to accumulate. Behind the headlines, the lawsuits, and the public reckonings are real people trying to reconcile their passion for music with the trauma they experience pursuing it. "Some days I still can't listen to my own songs," admitted one artist whose biggest hits were produced during their mentorship period. They're like time machines, taking me back to places I've spent years trying to escape. The stories continue to emerge, each one adding another piece to a troubling mosaic of industry practice. For every high-profile case that makes headlines, industry insiders estimate dozens more remain hidden, protected by legal agreements, fear of retaliation, or simply the victim's desire to move forward without revisiting trauma. Yet the pattern is becoming increasingly clear, increasingly undeniable with each new voice that finds the courage to speak. The truth about celebrity mentorships in the music industry reveals a system that has prioritized power and control over the well-being of young artists for far too long. While some have managed to navigate these treacherous waters and emerge successful, countless others have been left with invisible scars that may never fully heal. As consumers of music and entertainment, perhaps it's time we ask ourselves tougher questions about what we're really supporting when we stream songs or buy concert tickets. Behind every hit record may lie a story far different from the one we've been sold. The real change will only come when the industry itself is forced to reckon with its darkest corners. And that begins with all of us being willing to listen to those brave enough to finally break their silence.